Hey guys, welcome back to Fix It Friday. So this week I've been fortunate enough to get an extremely rare console to work on. This is the PC Engine LT. So for those of you that don't know, this is a version of the PC Engine, and that's known as the Turbografx 16 in the United States. And what's really cool about it is that it has a built-in LCD screen. So if you purchase this in Japan, all you'd have to do is just plug it in and you'd have your image here and you'd have your console here. So it's like a nice little handy portable-ish kind of console. I really love the aesthetic of this thing. It very much looks like something like as if the Game Boy Advance SP was built in the 90s instead of the early 2000s. So yeah, it's really cool. I've been fortunate enough to work on these before. In fact, I've even done a video on this, and so this one is the third one that I've had the privilege of working on. So unfortunately, this one just doesn't work. So like you can power it on, you can get the screen into like TV mode, but if you try to play a game, it just simply doesn't work. So we're gonna go ahead and take it apart and have a look at what's going on inside and see if we can get it going. All right, let's get started. Okay, so first thing we're gonna be doing is starting at the bottom and removing these 5 screws. All right, so it took a little bit of effort to open this because it's never been opened before. So now that I have it open, you can see that there are a couple of ribbons here that go from the screen to the PC Engine. And so to remove those, you just take some tweezers like I'm doing, and you just kind of pull these little bales upward. A little easier said than done. And this, there we go. Okay, and then this guy right here. Wow, that's really in there. Okay, wow. All right. So that's all set, and you can see that the inside of this thing is absolutely pristine. So this has not been opened since it left the factory. You can see everything is completely original on it, but that's most likely why we're having problems. So these capacitors here are known to go bad. Other things that can happen with the PC Engine LT is there's a voltage regulator here, and there's another one on the underside of the board that can go bad. So that may be the case in this one as well. So we're going to start by dealing with the capacitors. And doing that actually means desoldering a fairly decent amount of stuff, including this metal shield and even the hue card connector, so that we can gain access to them. Because as you can see, they're packed very, very tightly. Like there's really no easy way to get in here and remove those caps. All right, so let's keep taking this thing apart. All right, so here's the board, and as you can see, everything is very, very tightly packed. And so the only way that we're really gonna have any kind of access to this part of the board so that we can replace all these caps is to get rid of the cartridge slot and to get rid of this RF shield. So the PC Engine LT, it actually has a pretty thick ground plane, so that ground plane absorbs a lot of heat. So we're gonna be using a desoldering gun, and first I'm gonna start by removing the metal shield, but I do have the desoldering gun set to a kind of high temperature. I think it's at around, yeah, it's at around 840 Fahrenheit, so it's pretty hot, but it's because, again, the ground plane on here is strong, and so you need a lot of heat to kind of dislodge it. Okay, so now that I've taken care of that, I switched over to a smaller tip on the desoldering gun. And the reason why is because I'm going to be removing the cartridge connector, and it's these tiny little vias right here. So just like before, I'm keeping the heat higher than I normally do. I have it at about 850 or so Fahrenheit. And so I'm going to go through and just desolder all of these, and hopefully without too much effort, I'll be able to remove the cartridge connector. Okay, so now we're at a point where most of the capacitors are available. So I can get in there and I can certainly remove them easily now and clean up the pads, make sure there's no corrosion, and then come back and install new ones. But there's still like one or two more that might be a little tricky to gain access to. So specifically, I'm thinking about, this one right here, which is really close to some plastic components that might melt. And also over here in this little corner here, there's a little guy that's surrounded by a whole bunch of stuff. So I think what I might do is also remove this crystal oscillator because it's going to be in the way. So if I get rid of these caps plus this crystal oscillator, I should be able to come in and install this one. And then with this guy over here, I think I might actually remove this speaker connector because that's what this guy is. And then I should have plenty of access to come in this way and solder this capacitor in without any issues. Okay, so now we've got access to everything, so let's go ahead and remove all of these surface mount capacitors. There's more than one way of doing this. Some people prefer to use the heat method, where you just take a hot air gun and you hover it over the part, and then once the part is loose, you can just pull it off. That does work, and I do use that method sometimes, but what I find is that if you've got plastic components or stuff nearby that's heat sensitive, it can be really difficult to do that. What I prefer to do, as long as the traces and the pads look healthy, which they do in this case, is to use a pair of pliers like this and then twist them side to side. So just like so, where I hold it down and just twist, and you can hear the legs break. There we go. So I broke the legs off the capacitor, and you can see they're still stuck here on the board, and it doesn't do any damage to the pad. So again, this is not something you can do every single time. I'm doing it here because the pads look very healthy, but I find that this is a little bit easier to do and a little bit less complicated, at least with a board like this, where we've got lots of little plastic components right next to the surface mount parts. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and finish all that up. All right, so I've gone ahead and removed all the capacitors, and I'm just highlighting this little section here to illustrate just how bad this can be. So this whole part of the board manages power. So you've got your 7805 voltage regulator over here. You've got some larger filter capacitors, and then on the underside, there's a second regulator right over here, this little chip right here. So as you can see, just by looking at the board, there is a lot of electrolyte in this area, especially this cap right here. You can see there's gunk all over the place. And then these are the caps that actually came out of that area, and hopefully this is showing up on camera, but you can see there's gunk all around the edges. It's really crusty, and removing them, you get this kind of fishy, kind of gross smell to it. So that's a dead giveaway for why this PC Engine LT stopped working. This whole region here, those caps just failed. Thankfully, I don't think any of this is permanent. The traces actually look fine, and there was no damage, like none of the traces got lifted or anything like that. So now I just need to really clean things up. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys how I do that. All right, so I'm gonna start with this capacitor right over here, just cleaning the region here. So you can see that the legs are still on, and there is some electrolyte, although it's definitely not as bad as some of these other ones. So what I do is I add a very generous amount of solder, and I end up collecting the legs on the edge of my iron. And you can see they just come right off. And I can tell already, I can smell it, of course you guys can't, but there's definitely some electrolyte there. So now what I'm going to do is, you can either use a soldering braid, or I'm going to just go ahead and just use the desoldering gun really quick. I think I have to do this off camera because the camera's too close. Sorry for that. But hopefully you can see now, with the desoldering gun, I've removed all of that junk. And so as a result, now the pads look really good. They're nice and shiny. There's still some junk left over, but it's nothing major at this point. So then the final step is to come in and just get some isopropyl alcohol, and you want to clean not just the area of the capacitor, but the surrounding area as well, because electrolyte will have spilled, and you just want to neutralize and get rid of all that crap so that it doesn't create any problems for you later on. All right, I'm going to go ahead and clean this whole thing up, and then I'll show you how things look in the end. All right, so I've gone ahead and finished all the cleaning, and you can see that it looks really good now. So all of the capacitors are gone, all the residue and mess is gone as well. And even in this section where things were really ugly, it looks just fine now. So I spent extra time in this area because, again, this is related to power. So I cleaned up not only the pads, but I also cleaned up these little components. And then you should also make sure you flip the board over and clean this whole region as well, because a lot of times what happens is that the electrolytic fluid, it seeps in to the bottom and it wreaks havoc down here as well. And if this stuff all gets messed up, then you also will have problems and the game won't work. All right, so now that that's all done, let's begin the process of reassembling this board. All right, so I'm gonna just demonstrate how to do one capacitor. I'm not gonna show you guys all of them because it's honestly a bit tedious. But the way that you do these surface mount capacitors is, first you have to pay attention to the orientation. So the board indicates by the shape of the capacitor that the negative side is here on this flat side, and then the pointed side here is positive. So that means that the cap is going to be like this. So what you got to do is, I start by just filling up one pad with solder, like so. And then you can either do this with your hands, or you can do it with holding it with a pair of pliers. And depending on where I am on the board, I'll do one or the other. But basically, then you go ahead, you heat up the pad, and then you just slide in the capacitor like that. And I might just heat it up again and reposition it. Just like that. And now I can see that the other leg is right on top of the pad. Okay, so that one's done, and then I might go to the back leg one more time and then just touch it up. And then there we go. That capacitor is all set. So I'm gonna go ahead and go one at a time and take care of each one of these caps. Okay, so after hours and hours of work, I finally have this PC Engine LT fully recapped and put back together. So I didn't show all of the cap, installs, mainly just because it's kind of repetitive and it's the same thing. The only thing to keep in mind if you're trying to do this yourself is you have to be very strategic. So you have to pick which ones you want to add and make sure that you don't end up blocking yourself when a nearby capacitor needs to be installed. That's really the biggest thing. But if you've removed those components, then it's really a lot easier to move around. And you definitely want to, use a small soldering iron tip like I've done here. Using a very large chisel tip isn't a great idea. You just don't have a lot of room to work. So then once all the caps were installed, I went ahead and I reinstalled all the other components back. This RF shield is optional, but this particular system is so clean and so mint, I wanted to keep it exactly the way it was from the factory. So I decided to install all the components back, including the RF shield. All right, so now that this is done, let's go ahead and put the thing back together and see if it's working. All right, so here's the moment of truth. Let's power this thing on and see if it works. Oh, yes. Oh my God, that's so awesome. Oh, there it is. Street Fighter II Championship Edition. This is such a great game to have if you're a PC Engine collector. I mean, it's an outstanding port of Street Fighter II, and it's a lot of fun. But yeah, it looks like this console's fixed again. So all it took was just replacing those capacitors. And yeah, you can see that the screen is actually pretty good on this. It's comparable to the Turbografx, it's just a little bit larger. And it's also compatible with the CD attachment, so you can actually put that on here too. Make sure this is in focus here, and you can adjust brightness here. You've got your volume. Playing it is a little bit strange because the controls are right here, and so you kind of have to hold it in your hand or in your lap. So it's kind of portable, kind of not, and I think NEC quickly realized the mistake, and so then they made the PC Engine GT and the Express. So that means that there's very few of these made, and that makes these extremely rare and hard to find. Alright guys, well that's it for this video. So if you like this kind of content, then consider subscribing to the channel. I have videos out on repairs and mods every Friday, and then if you guys have consoles that you need repaired or modded, you can always reach me directly at oneuprestorations.com. Alright, well thanks so much for watching guys, and I will see you next time.